Hello everybody. For our next video lecture here for chapter 1, we're going to talk a little bit about microbes and how they influence the planet. So if you've been reading in your textbook, which hopefully you are, there's a little bit of a section in chapter 1 about the evolutionary history of life on the planet. Alright, we've got a timeline here, and what this timeline is showing you is that the Earth is believed to be about 4.5 billion years old. So that's a long time. The universe is thought to be about 13 billion years old. Now, when did the first living things appear on the planet? Current thinking is somewhere between 3 billion and 4 billion years ago, a little over 3.5 billion years ago. At some point, the first single-celled organisms are believed to have appeared on the planet, and those organisms would have been in the prokaryotic cell category. And we're going to hear quite a bit about prokaryotes versus eukaryotes throughout the semester. There are two major types of cells on the planet, and some of those are called prokaryotic cells, and then others are called eukaryotic cells. And karyo refers to nucleus. So eukaryotic cells, this prefix "eu" here means true. So eukaryotic cells have a true nucleus, and so that is a membrane-covered structure inside of which, that's where the DNA of the cell is located, inside the nucleus. That's where the genes are, the genetic material. Prokaryotic cells don't have a true membrane-covered nucleus, and they're called prokaryotes, which means before nucleus. So there's a structure called a nucleoid, which is where all the DNA is located, but it doesn't have a membrane covering it. So anyway, about a little over 3 billion years ago, or I'm sorry, somewhere between 3 and 4 billion years ago, the first prokaryotic type single-celled organisms are thought to have developed. Prokaryotic cells are different from eukaryotic cells in some ways. In general, they tend to be much smaller. Eukaryotic cells have more complex internal structures that you may have learned about when in prior biology classes or anatomy and physiology. And we'll talk more about those differences as we move through the semester. Now, when did the first eukaryotic cells? These are generally larger, more complex on the interior, and somewhere close to 2 billion years ago, we had the first eukaryotic cells that developed on the planet. Those were also single-celled organisms. Now, when we think about living things that we can see with the naked eye, you know, those are more complex type living things, multicellular living things, where you have groups of cells that function together as organs or organ systems. And those more complex types of living things came along later. And it's interesting when you look at the whole timeline of the Earth here. Human beings, you know, we've only been here for a little blip on the radar. And even mammals, you know, much less than 1 billion years on the planet. Reptiles, including dinosaurs, you know, a few 100 million years ago, that's when the dinosaurs existed. And when you look at the whole timeline of life on the Earth, even the dinosaurs appeared a relatively short period of time ago. Sometimes it's hard to think about this timeline of evolutionary history. So what do we mean by evolution? All right, so evolution is referring to changes that occur in living things over time. And evolution can occur with minor changes that's sometimes referred to as microevolution. And then evolution can also occur as large changes where you see dramatic changes in individual organisms or species, and that's called macroevolution. Why does evolution take place? It allows living things to adapt to new environments. So maybe you've heard before of survival of the fitness. And evolution is driven by a process that's called natural selection. And natural selection occurs through random genetic mutations, changes in the DNA. These are these molecular blueprints or recipe books that exist in cells that determine the traits, the characteristics that cells and more complex organisms are actually going to have. So there are random changes that occur over time, and sometimes those changes are harmful to an organism, sometimes they're helpful. And if they're helpful, they may allow a living organism to adapt to living in a different environment. It may help it survive better in an existing environment, and that can lead to new traits, and those get passed down to offspring. So that's a very overly simplistic description of natural selection and evolution. But this drives the basis of what we call the theory of evolution. And I do want you guys to appreciate that the word theory in science is not used in the same way that it is in casual conversation, where we say my personal theory about what's going on with those people is blah blah blah. That's not how theory is used in science. Theory is in science is a very well documented scientific explanation for something. So you've got a lot of data, a lot of evidence to back it up. The theory of evolution has existed for over 100 years, and it's still being modified as new information becomes available. We're still developing a deeper understanding of it, but it is a well-accepted explanation for why we see that all living things on the planet appear to have common ancestry with each other, and how these living things have developed over a very long period of time here on the planet Earth. Now, in microbiology, we'll tend to talk more about microevolution, which are short-term changes that can occur quickly in living things. So microorganisms like bacteria and viruses, they replicate very, very quickly. When they're replicating, genetic mutations can take place. Sometimes those mutations are advantageous to the microorganism, and they might help that microorganism survive out in the wild in a better way. And so we'll talk quite a bit this semester about how bacteria can evolve, viruses can evolve and change pretty quickly, and we've got some problems with that. A major problem is, we've got all these great drugs, for example, antibiotics that help treat bacterial infections, but the bacteria change, they mutate, they evolve in a microevolution type of way and become resistant to those antibiotic drugs. They don't work against those bacteria anymore, and so we have to come up with new ones. So that's an example of small-scale evolution, something that you can actually witness in a fairly short period of time. When we're talking about macroevolution, like the development of new species of plants and animals and so forth, those are things that take place over very, very, very long periods of time. Not something you're going to see in a typical human lifetime. The theory of evolution also is based on the idea of common ancestry or descent. So all living things that exist on the planet today, you can trace a family tree backwards in time, backwards billions of years, to a last common ancestor, an ancestral cell, from which all living things that exist today on the planet, whether they're bacteria, fungi, plants, animals, whatever, they all have common ancestry with a single-celled organism that have existed on Earth billions of years ago. So if you hear about common descent or common ancestry, that's what that's referring to. All right, how about some other just kind of basic issues about microorganisms and the planet Earth? Microorganisms are present in all ecosystems. So every ecosystem on the planet that we have observed, there are microorganisms there, and they generally play very vital roles there. So if microbes didn't exist on our planet, we would not exist. So be sure you read through the information in your textbook on that topic. So even environments on our planet which we would have assumed not too long ago were completely hostile to living things, like temperatures above the boiling point of water, environments where there are many gases that would be toxic for us, very cold environments, environments deep under the bottom of the ocean floor. In all of those types of ecosystems, microorganisms have actually been discovered. Low pH, acidic environments, where if you stuck your finger in there, it would strip all the tissues off. There are actually microorganisms that can live under those conditions. So that's been a big surprise in the last few decades. So microorganisms are very widespread and play vital roles in different environments. Microorganisms also carry out a lot of photosynthesis. So we've all heard of photosynthesis before. Photo in biology refers to light. And you've heard before about plants doing photosynthesis. They use the energy from sunlight and they take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, little carbon-containing molecules, and they're able to use that energy from the sunlight to power taking that carbon dioxide and linking all those carbon dioxide molecules together to build all of their important, biologically important molecules like sugars and amino acids and DNA and RNA and lipids, all those important things that living things require for survival. And also notice that organisms that do photosynthesis give off O2, oxygen gas, to the atmosphere. So they take in carbon dioxide, they give off oxygen gas to the atmosphere. And hopefully you remember from your anatomy and physiology classes or freshman biology classes that organisms like us, we take in oxygen gas, we've got to use that for our survival purposes, and we give off CO2. So you've got a cycle that's going on there. Your photosynthesizers use CO2, they give off O2, we use O2, and we give off CO2. So hopefully you can kind of see there's a cycle of dependence there where living things on this planet are linked together and depend upon each other for survival. All right, so you tend to learn in grade school, maybe middle school, that plants do photosynthesis. That's absolutely true, but microbes actually perform about 70%. So what microbes do photosynthesis? Algae, and then there are photosynthetic bacteria that do photosynthesis as well. We just don't hear as much about those organisms doing photosynthesis. All right, some other ways that microorganisms impact our planet. They have very diverse metabolisms. So the ways in which they derive their energy and where are they getting their nutrition, all these chemical reactions that take place inside cells to allow them to survive. So you learn about human metabolism when you take anatomy and physiology. As you go through this course, you're going to be learning about how microorganisms, different species, have very diverse metabolisms. So the microorganisms give off gases of different kinds as byproducts of all of their metabolic processes, and those gases have impacts on the Earth and its atmosphere. Microorganisms play an important role in soil formation. So microorganisms are the things that decompose other living things and return those nutrients and so forth back to the Earth. So they're involved in soil formation. Think about compost, like a compost pile. If you've ever built one of those, microorganisms are breaking down your lawn clippings and leaves and food waste and so forth from your kitchen and converting that into compost, a soil-like substance. Mineral weathering, erosion, microbes play a role in that. And as we move through this semester, we'll discuss more than once about how microorganisms tend to live in association with other living things. That includes the human body. Your skin is covered with microorganisms. Your mouth is full of microorganisms. Your intestinal lining has tons of microorganisms in it, especially in the colon or large intestine. And we've really come to appreciate in recent years how vital those microorganisms that live on and inside our body are. So again, I want you guys to appreciate sooner rather than later in this class that microorganisms are not the enemy. We're interested in the ones that are, but many of them are friendly and beneficial to us. All right, so that concludes this video lecture clip. The next one will be taking a little bit of a closer look at the way microbes and humans interact.